expectations. Our children have been suspended at higher rates, and they have experienced the legal system far too often in negative ways. Therefore, many Bronx parents have no reason to trust City Hall and the Department of Education making the decisions for the education, the safety, and the well being and the lives of their children without their input. The DOE doesn't have a good enough record with Bronx parents to demand that privilege. And City Hall and Department of Education has no right and no moral standing to demand that parents relinquish their rights to help make those decisions. We also reject the notion that remote learning cannot work well for many. We submit to you that it wasn't done as well as it could have been done, and nothing was done to improve it. We submit to you that the educational approach of one size fits all is the reason the Department of Education has been failing so many of our students, because the inequities have never been addressed through different approaches that could give the educational outcome that we say we are looking for. Chancellor Porter, you have before you the opportunity to respond to this pandemic in a way that can be quite innovative for education in underserved communities, because we in the Bronx cannot go back to normal educational practice. They didn't work for us. What we need is a reopening that takes into consideration the needs of different students and families and give them what they need, including the remote option. Apart from this discussion tonight, we look forward to many more discussions with you and the mayor, because Bronx parents are determined not to go back to normal and to be heard, thereby improving an education system that has never worked for them. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Aurora. And now Chancellor Ross Porter will have her opening statement. Thank you, Chancellor.
So good evening. It's good to be home in the Bronx physically and virtually. And, I have to say that, it's an honor and a privilege to be at the table with all of you as always. I thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to engage in a discussion. I've been chancellor now for over 4 months. It's been a challenging experience and a rewarding experience. And I'm excited to be here today with my cabinet and also to be joined by Dr. Stevens, the Deputy Commissioner at DOHMH for Family and Child Health. Every day I approach this job through the lens of my years of service as an educator, as a mother, and all of the experience that I've had throughout this system. But I just want to start by leaning into all of that experience happened in the Bronx. And so with all of you, I know very well both the inequities that exist in the Bronx, as well as the amazing leaders, teachers, educators, parents, and families that live in the Bronx. And, when I took on this role, it was also front and center for me to really be thoughtful about how I elevate parent voice and make sure that communities like the Bronx, from the seat of the chancellor, are recognized and their needs are addressed. So, when I embraced this opportunity to lead this department at a moment that I knew was most critical, at a moment when I knew that the priorities were going to be clear, and I said them from probably the day I started. My priorities were to open our high schools, which we did successfully, open summer rising, which we are working hard to make sure that we do, and provide opportunities for in-person summer enrichment experiences for any student who's interested, and leverage that as a bridge back to opening in September. I also am not, and I've said this over and over again, I'm looking forward to us building a new normal together. I know that our normal of yesteryear is not a normal that met the needs of all students and families. But the work that we did together in the Bronx has absolutely shown gains, both in student performance and graduation rates that have surpassed those across the city. And so we've had an intentional focus on reducing suspension disproportionality, reducing referrals to special education. Most importantly, a very specific and intentional focus on advancing equity and recognizing, as I led in the brownest borough in New York City, what that meant for students and families who live in the Bronx, myself included. But I want to understand and acknowledge that this has been one of the most challenging academic years in our city's history and in all of our lives. And through it all, you, your children, our educators have stepped up and met challenges. And I couldn't be more proud of the resilience and perseverance that I've seen in our schools. And I couldn't be more proud that this group of Bronx parent leaders is stepping up in service of the parents you serve. You know, I've said also over and over again, and I'm not going to opt out to leaning into a question of who owns this call. I've said over and over again, I believe our students need to be in their classrooms with their teachers and their students, and the best learning that happens for students is in person. The inequities that you raised are those in which we need to interrupt. Remote learning over this past 18 months, by the time we get back to school, was a response to a pandemic. What I'm excited about and looking forward to is how do we leverage what we've learned in remote learning to innovate our system going forward? And that's what I'm excited about doing. And so I'm confident that we are going to be creating safe and healthy environments for our educators and our students. I'm also the mother of a New York City public school student, sending my own child back into buildings every single day. And the 2021-22 school year is going to be our best year yet. It's going to be the best year because we're going to lean into these conversations and think forward our system together. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Farah and Adrian and leave space for your questions.
Thank you so much for that. And now concerning our presentation, we will start with the topic of health and safety. And Dr. Vincent Sasioko, you have the floor to help us make our case. Thank you.
Yes, hi, good evening. Thank you for having me here. Hopefully you can hear me. Unfortunately, I couldn't get on video. So my name is Dr. Vincent Sasioko. I'm a family physician. I've been working in the Bronx community for over 15 years now, working with the underserved population and those with complex care needs. So as a family physician taking care of pediatric and adult patients, I've unfortunately seen firsthand the consequences of COVID, as everybody has seen, especially those that have had to learn remotely. So as we address the pandemic and hopefully more people are getting vaccinated, the reality is that not enough people are getting vaccinated. And we're aware that based on New York City DOH recent data, it shows that overall there's only about 41, 42% of the Bronx have been fully vaccinated. So the concerns are, well, first of all, it's wonderful to get everybody back to school, back on site. That's so important. But there are unfortunately those students, pediatric individuals that are at risk because of medical concerns, because of other factors that may put them at a higher risk if they do go back to school. So that's where the group feels that the need to have that option for remote learning for those particular cases. We are still in the pandemic. There is still a risk out there. So it is warranted to have that discussion on how we can have that option for families, for those kids that are still at risk to go back on site. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sasioko, and please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing the name. And now we'll turn it over to Dr. Stevens, who's going to tell us. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you so much for allowing me to join you in this space. Hopefully you can hear me. This is my first opportunity to join this group, but hopefully that we can continue this important conversations. Thank you, Dr. Sasioko. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your name right, for raising something that's very important to me. I am a pediatrician. I worked in the Bronx at a federally qualified health center prior to working in foster care and joining the Department of Health as a deputy commissioner. I am first and foremost centering the health and safety of the city's children every day. And I very much appreciate the way you framed when we think about our schools, when we think about our children. It's right to center those who are most vulnerable, those who are medically fragile, those who we are most in heightened concern about. You mentioned a couple of things that I just want to make sure that I try to highlight and address. In our work so far in the schools, I was in the situation room in this past year, and I know as hard as this year has been, we were doing our best to try to get kids the learning and the safety and the environment that they deserved. And it was difficult. But we were able to do so with a lot of important safety measures that I want to make sure that we continue to center, right? Before we had vaccine, we had lower rates of transmission in our schools than in the community because we stuck to our safety protocols. So I just want to double down and say we have every intention to continue to partner to have the best, most accurate and up-to-date safety protocols in place and the systems to monitor them, because those are how we're going to keep our kids safe. The second thing you mentioned was vaccination. It's a very important tool. As you said, we're not where we want to be with our vaccine numbers, but we're not where we were. And so I am encouraged by our continued partnership and efforts. I continue to try to message as much as possible. And I'm an adolescent medicine person, so I believe youth voice is much more believable than mine. So we're really trying to get the word out to get as many folks protected as possible. And we still have work to do there, but we're hopeful that we'll be able to continue to do that throughout the summer into the fall. And the last thing you mentioned is a very specific group that I know I'm running out of time, are medically fragile children. And I just want you to know that, there are, in addition to our safety protocols, there have always been a process for medically fragile children to appeal, right, and apply for exemptions, right? And we will very much take all of those into consideration to make sure that we protect those most vulnerable, those at risk of severe illness and increased morbidity and mortality. That is absolutely part of our plan. And I'm sorry I took too long. Sorry.
Well, thank you, Dr. Stevens, for informing us that, that is now part of the plan, because parents were under the impression that, no exceptions. That's what we heard from the mayor, what we heard from the chancellor before. So I guess we're making progress. Thank you so much for that. And now,
sorry, Sarah, just to, I was going to just say, I know that home instruction is a part of that plan. And so if we could bring Linda in, because I know folks who do have medically fragile children, and Farrah's always, it's up to you because I know you're running the show. But
yes, I would love to leave that. I would love to leave that because we don't want the chancellor to leave without us making our full case.
Okay.
So I would love to hear from Linda, but I want to hear from her after. So that so that we make our case to the chancellor. That's very important. Okay, but I love what you just said, Dr. Stevens. That's progress. And now we have that. A licensed social worker, Shanukwa Moore, who will speak for us on behalf of mental health. Right? Thank you so much, Ms. Moore.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Good evening to our chancellor. As mentioned, I'm a New York City licensed social worker and the CEO of I Raise Girls and Boys, which is a community-based organization that partners and works with the DOE to provide essential mental health and school social work services. As mentioned earlier, we know that New York City kids were at the center of the pandemic. They experienced collective and secondary trauma that led to high rates of anxiety and depression, and many neighborhoods, the Bronx being the most impacted. I want to highlight a few key findings from a study that my organization launched during the pandemic, which really assessed the psychological impact of COVID on our New York City kids. And what the study revealed was that 90% of our kids felt safer staying at home. Over 80% of our kids revealed that they were afraid of dying or afraid of their loved ones dying due to COVID. Over 35% of our kids lost a loved one due to COVID. We also seen a rise in the number of kids feeling sadder and angrier during COVID. We saw a 10% increase in children relying on their family for emotional support. Our students in New York City self-reported face coverings, diminishing their quality of life and provoking feelings of anger and uncomfortability. This is something that we need to consider as we're reopening in the fall. Students also self-reported feeling afraid and anxious of being bullied in school and racially discriminated against in school. So based on research, New York City kids are asking for help to talk about race and racial discrimination, and not having these measures in place prior to school reopenings could have serious implications. Also want to mention that we have seen some kids who have soared and adjusted well during remote learning, and we can't cancel out those children. We also noticed that 99% of kids self-reported wanting to receive help through digital applications, such as phone counseling, Zoom, and other methods virtually. So as we recover from COVID the right way, we have to incorporate every child in New York City, including students with special needs, students with diverse learning styles, coping styles, and students facing different challenges who may not be fully ready and prepared to reacclimate back into the school environment in person. We believe, based on research and these statistics, that we must leave remote learning as an option on a table for kids who may be facing social anxiety and depression, and other kids that may also be facing other challenges. Not doing so may have serious implication on our young people. We may see an increase in school violence, an increase in antisocial behavior, an increase in risky behavior and suicide ideation. As our Chancellor mentioned, our world in a world in which we live has drastically changed, and we have to consider these changes in other forms of learning, including remote learning, and be willing to make necessary adjustments to prioritize our kids' mental health. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Ms. Moore. And now we'll allow the Chancellor 2 minutes to respond.
Sure. So we look forward to leveraging all that we've learned in remote learning in our system going forward. And we also are very much aware on both sides of that story, right? The students who have really thrived and the students who have really struggled in remote learning, that they and the mental health supports that some of our students have really struggled with by being socially isolated from school is a real thing. And so that's why we've made huge investment in social workers and social emotional supports and mental health services in schools. But what is critical and key is how we welcome students back, what that transition looks like. It cannot be the first day of school that we planned 2 years ago. It cannot be we just open the doors on September 13th. That it has to be a process of transitioning back to school. Summarizing is part of it, but also ongoing dialogue, open houses, access over the summer to our buildings for our families and community members, as well as really centering and identifying those communities that have been harmed and how we, and those students who haven't been at school at all, and how we reach back to them over this summer to begin to build that bridge and have conversations about what families need. I've said over and over again, the pathway back to school is grounded in ensuring that we have strong social emotional supports in place, grounded in academic learning as a part of our students' daily experiences, centered in ensuring that our students see and experience themselves in the curriculum. While our students dealt with a pandemic, they also dealt with significant racial uprisings and upheaval and you know, social issues that they got to watch on camera in ways they had not done before. And so we recognize the need to ensure that we are, one, meeting the needs of diverse learners, leveraging technologies to do that, but also building a strong pathway that is grounded in meeting the social emotional needs of all of our students in the transition back.
Thank you so much, Chancellor. We are happy to hear that. And I think the case Ms. Moore made is that the time frame, right? Some kids may be ready today, some kids may be ready in September, and some may be ready in December. So we don't get, as individuals, as organizations, to sort of decide the timetable for healing for kids, and that needs to be taken into consideration. Thank you so much. And now we have Eduardo presenting on building capacity and health concerns. Thank you.
Wow, already? I thought I had a couple of minutes. So I was originally thinking about crunching numbers and comparing the CDC guidelines to show that the capacity is not there for our buildings. But we're expecting to the guidelines to change. That's and just for the conversation that we've been having with you guys with the DOE staff, it's obvious that the current plan is with the expectation that these guidelines will be lifted. But Even if so, before the pandemic, our schools were overcrowded. That has not changed. Our enrollment has gone lower slightly, but still our buildings are overcrowded. The majority of our buildings are overcrowded. So there is not even enough space to keep any distance, let away the current guidelines of 3 feet. So by keeping, we need to be creative. The DOE always talking about reimagining, but we ended up working with that within the same box. So we need to get creative here and truly reimagine a system that could accommodate most of our kids and the needs of our kids. Instead of throwing the blanket policy, some of our zip codes in the Bronx that have as low as, I believe the last time, 30% vaccination rate. So how are we going to implement the same policy on those neighborhoods as you do on neighborhoods that already had 70 or 80% in some other affluent districts? You shouldn't. So we need to get creative and establish a remote system. It's not for everybody. We do know that some kids need to be present, but we still need to make it safe. And it's not just COVID. We tend to forget, just because COVID is being bragging the news, that thousands of people still die from the flu. And there will be, now is the COVID, but this is now gonna be the last pandemic that we're gonna see. Hopefully it will not be as bad as COVID, but there is all the diseases and that can affect our children, that this is a great opportunity to sort of start getting ahead of it and have a system in place that we will not have to scramble if and when the situation becomes critical. So that's what I said. When we talk about reimagine, let's truly reimagine and stop picking up the low-hanging fruit, and let's do a more specific plan for all the schools, instead of just having that blanket policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eduardo, and I will give the Chancellor a chance to respond.
I'm going to actually ask Kevin Moran to respond, because we aren't taking a blanket approach to space and are working specifically with individual buildings, because we know every building and community is different. So I'm going to just let Kevin Moran take that one.
Yes. Thank you, Chancellor, and thank you, Eduardo. One of the things we're working on now is a collaborative effort with our interagency partners and our union partners and our school leaders and our borough leaders with our executive superintendents, looking at schools, looking at capacity, looking at systems, looking at the layered approach that Dr. Stevens mentioned. The approach that this year, and this isn't a research study that we read in a book or we found somewhere else, there are over 1 million COVID tests conducted in our school system this year and produce less than 1% infection. And so when we wear our masks, when we make sure the ventilation system's dialed in, when we make sure we're doing pre-screenings and staying home when sick, all of these measures keep our buildings safe, extraordinarily safe. And so when we looked at space and analysis, you're right, not one building's the same. And we look at what shared spaces are spaces that we have to use. I've walked high schools where a cafeteria now, houses 5 classrooms. And so there are things we're looking at. We conducted just this past month walkthroughs of multiple layers of schools where we feel that space is a challenge. And we're looking with principals at creative solutions. And they could be staffing solutions. They could be additional spaces available. But those are active conversations now. We look to the guidance and we look to the medical experts about how we're going to work in our schools and what are those guidelines that we need. But we found the mask wearing to be the most effective, ultimately partnered up with our ventilation systems and testing those systems to make sure they're working. So that work will continue, and the spatial work around programming and what that means. And if there's some hardship around multi-session schools or different models that have been surfaced, we're reviewing them all. And the Chancellor knows that our team is due back with a series of recommendations, and the issues that we're seeing from schools are unique to each school, and those creative solutions happen there as well. So we'll be supportive and resource where we can, and then bring problems to leadership that we need to help solve some of these more difficult challenges.
All right. All right. I'll apologize. I got it because I forgot a point that because I heard about.
Sorry, Eduardo, we love you, but we want to keep the program, right? Whatever we do to the DOE, we must do to ourselves because we must be fair. Moving on with the program, but I will say this much to Mr. Moran is that, you know, if those things are not clear yet because we're still discussing, we're still doing assessments or what have you, then we shouldn't make the decision before we have all these answers, you know, at our fingertips. So moving on from Eduardo, now Amy will make the case for students with disabilities, accessibility and busing. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Chancellor. I just want to say, not just as a parent of 5, but also as an advocate for our special education students. As you know, we have 200,000 students with individual educational plans, and that's only students that are identified under the IEP. As you see geographically, through the percentage of our students, the darker colors are the higher numbers of special education students. And so again, students that are IEPs are individual educational programs. Students that have learning challenges, students that have mental and intellectual challenges, students that have physical challenges, and also students that have 504 accommodations for specific needs. And so I just wanted to say that, many of our students are most vulnerable and immune compromised, and I appreciate the exceptions rule and guidance for those students, but they are just very basic lining of what those plans will look like. No specifics on what it will look like when a student is not eligible for vaccinations and who will not be able to wear a mask because they're asthmatic and have chronic asthma, because, even though they may have breaks throughout the day, still may not be enough. Students that have GI issues and pica issues, this is not an issue where you can just, forget and ignore and still be able to have a normal day through the hours of the school day. Students with special education, obviously in the beginning of the pandemic, was crying that they needed the service in person and had to get used to the new routine. But as long as we got into the new routine, they got used to the new routine. And it's more challenging for students in special education to get used to routine and have to fall back on a new routine that is not giving any transitional plan. And so, giving us that plan that is not actually fitting for our students with disabilities and learning challenges is going to be very difficult. As you know, 150,000 of our students citywide, 60,000 of them are special needs students that ride buses. As you know, historically, our students ride buses from district to district, borough to borough, citywide. And yet last year, our busing plan was just the same as normal traditional busing. No, clarity on social distancing, students were unmasked, students that were masked. Parents, obviously, first priority was, because there was no clarity, they couldn't put their kids on the bus in order to get to school and home. As I am a representative for District 75, I appreciate that you've taken this in consideration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy, for that. And we'll give the Chancellor about a minute to respond. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be quick and, just say, we understand, Kevin has also led our work around busing and ensuring that we are, building up our fleet, have a plan for September, but recognize very clearly that we cannot have a one-size-fits-all approach to education going forward. That's what the pandemic taught us most importantly. And centering our most vulnerable students will continue to be our priority. And we learned so much, during the pandemic. Our District 75 teachers stepped up in ways. They were back in the building with students before anyone else. And so I just want to acknowledge that we know that we can't have a one size fits all approach. And just let Kevin just say something briefly about busing.
Yeah, absolutely. Amy, I appreciate the question, statement, and comment. And I want to clear one thing up. There was absolutely a differentiated approach for special education busing. Certainly we had medical accommodations for those who were not mask tolerant. We had a process for that. But we also had deep cleaning, electrostatic sprayers provided to every bus company across the city. Those were cleaned. We had enhanced PPE on special education routes. I observed them myself. I'm at the loading docks when the masks, the face shields, the gloves, the hand sanitizer, and everything was packed in those buses. I personally watched it. So I need to assure you that in cases where students were demasked because of tolerance issues, there was enhanced PPE, and there was social distancing, and the windows were left open when permitted, when we didn't need the AC. So I just want to be clear, that information was posted very early, and we did spot checks constantly to make sure that those protocols are being followed. And I think you would agree with the low infection rate, those were proven successful.
Okay, thank you for that, Chancellor and Mr. Moran. And now we are moving on to the topic of instruction. And the Bronx Parent Leaders Advocacy Group would like to suggest ways that we can improve remote and leverage those things that we learned from remote learning. So Gretchen Thompson, thank you for joining us, and you have the floor.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you inviting me here, certainly, Farah, and I have loved listening to all of you and what you have to share. Many of you don't know me. I recognize a couple of faces. My name again is Gretchen Thompson. I'm the Strategic Partnership VP at Gaggle. And if you're not familiar with what Gaggle is, it is a service that has been on the market for about 22 years now that simply and most certainly is here to protect student safety. We are acting as the student safety net for not only acting as the insurance as your filter, your firewall, your one-to-one initiatives, as well as any of your social media support. We sit underneath all of those things that you guys have already actively put into place where you're located to protect your kids in and outside of the brick and mortar. And where we have really seen a crazy 15 months is how we had to really jump in the middle of the pandemic and come up with some different scenarios and ideas where we could actually support hybrid and virtual learning versus what we've always done. We have always been able to protect school district email and Drive, as well as Teams and Hangouts and Microsoft and Google. And the pandemic comes and everything is, what are we doing as far as education? And I'll tell you what, everybody did a pretty dang good job at jumping in and still being able to service our kids. But we were able to see that in a virtual environment, Gaggle specifically is still able to protect those children. So of course, we all would like our children, I think everybody would agree for the most part, if we could have all of our children within the brick and mortar and those four walls where they're seeing their friends and they're seeing their teachers. A former educator and administrator myself here in Cleveland, Ohio, I certainly would want that. But we also know that not every child is able to be in that environment. And we've certainly learned that during the pandemic. And so that being said, what I care most about is being able to really recognize the fact that we've had certainly a lot of children who maybe, several have mentioned this, have been, bullied, cyberbullied. They are very, they're very sad right now. We've had a lot of things that have happened with our kids, our families, our communities, right? And so these kids are, certainly going to be bringing that back to school, whether that is inside the brick and mortar, whether that is in a virtual learning environment. Their mental health and their feelings are not going to go away. And that is something that you all should know that we are able to support, is we are able to get a better idea of what we're seeing in a virtual learning environment as well as in the brick and mortar. It doesn't matter if they're in or outside of the building. We are able to see in their district digital issued tools how they're communicating. We have seen more about them sharing with one another, how they're sad, how they're talking about taking their life, how they're being abused at home, how they're being abused by a friend or a sibling, right? There are a lot of different things that we have been able to see and certainly reach out to the district first and foremost to get in contact with the parents, the community accordingly, as they best see fit to be able to support those children very quickly. One thing that we also launched was our mental health support. I know that you guys have a great support system where you are, but that's something that we actually launched a year earlier than we expected, because we wanted to make sure that we had a virtual telehealth support, therapy support service in place for these kids that maybe were having a hard time being able to get Medicaid or to get into private insurance. They were on a wait list, right? Even the services that you were providing, they were on a wait list, or they couldn't actually go to a building and see someone one-to-one. And so that's something that we are able to do. And I encourage you, whether it's in the building or outside of the building, just understand that the old normal that we all knew and that we were familiar with and that we all went to school to teach our children well, right? And we want our kids to be in school. That old normal didn't work for every child then too. And so I'm just very thankful that I could provide this information to you all and know that we are here to help you any step of the way. And best of luck to you guys. You're going to do good.
Thank you so much, Gretchen, for this. And I just want to make it clear to the DOE, it's not really a question of plugging in a particular business. As you can see, this is not even a business in New York City. It's to show the idea that, and we do have actually, we had another person from New York State that was willing to come on, but the schedule didn't work out, but we will include that in our written document, because we research a lot of companies who actually did remote learning really well, and that actually, when I read the reasons, and I hear the reasons why the DOE wants to have everyone in person because remote was so bad, but then there are companies out there who were able to help with some of the same issues that we were talking about. And as parents, we want to put that on the table, so that the DOE knows that there are other things out there that we should research and look into. Thank you for that, and we'll give the Chancellor a chance to respond. Sorry.
No, I mean, I think we can go to the next question in the interest of time. I mean, I think that, thank you, Gretchen, for sharing the work that you've done. And the only thing I'll say is this, is we look forward to leveraging what we've learned in remote and continuing to leverage online learning platforms, online tools for assessment, online tools to check in with our students. We look forward, and I don't know that I said this at the top, would love to invite parents to be a part of what y'all talked about later. What Eduardo talked about, how do we reimagine this system using this as a learning tool forward?
Thank you so much, Chancellor. And now we'll move on to Leonie Hampson. I hope I said that well, talking about class size.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, thank you for inviting me today. Nice to see you, Chancellor, and everyone from the DOE. I'm Leonie Hampson from Class Size Matters. One thing we know for sure is that smaller classes lead to better grades, test scores, stronger student engagement, fewer disciplinary referrals, and higher graduation rates, especially for those students who need help the most. And what some teachers and parents tell us, that the only saving grace of in-person learning this year was the smaller class sizes that were created because so many parents kept their kids home in remote learning. In 2003, the state's highest court said that class sizes in New York City schools were too large to provide students with their constitutional right to a sound basic education, and yet class sizes have gone up since then, not down, especially in the early grades. And more than 336,000 students are in classes of 30 or more before the pandemic hit. Our class sizes are 15 to 30% higher on average than the rest of the state. Obviously, these are not great learning conditions, and we believe that smaller classes will be needed more than ever before to reopen schools safely and with additional learning support, give students the emotional and academic feedback they need after all the personal losses and traumas they've suffered and more than a year of disrupted learning. They will need close connections with their teachers more than ever before. We also did an analysis showing that more than half of all students would not be able to attend school 5 days a week in person with 3 feet of social distancing, given standard room sizes of 500 to 750 square feet and class sizes last year. While the DOE claims only 10% of schools cannot provide social distancing, our analysis does not show that. And in fact, Mark Canizero, the head of the principals union, testified before the city council that he didn't buy that figure either, and that many schools will find it impossible to ensure any social distancing if all students return to school full-time next year. Now, we got $8 billion in additional state and federal aid provided our schools over the next 2 to 3 years, $7 billion in federal funds, and in state funds, about $530 million next year, increasing to $1.3 billion over 3 years as a result of the CFE case, in which the court said that our class sizes were too large to provide our kids with a sound basic education, even in normal times. The council proposed to invest $250 million next year for smaller classes for the purpose of additional academic and emotional support and to help with social distancing. Sadly, the mayor resisted, and in the final budget announced yesterday, only $18 million will be spent on a very small pilot project for class size reduction, which we really regret, given the almost unlimited resources that we were provided and the crying need for smaller classes, both for the sake of social distancing and for the stronger academic and social support that kids will need.
Thank you so much for that, Leonie, and we will give the Chancellor a little bit of time to respond. Thank you. Oh, before you respond, Chancellor, I do want to make clear that besides the CECs and President's Councils and education committees that are part of Bronx Flag, that a new settlement PAC, Parent Advisory Committee, forgive me, Chancellor, if I'm messing that up, is also part of Flag. So just letting everyone know. Thank you, Chancellor, your turn.
Yep. So thank you, Leonie. It's nice to meet you. I don't think we've had a chance to meet. We definitely agree that class size is an issue, and one that we need to leverage this moment of resources, not only our fair student funding, but also our stimulus funding, to really look strategically and intentionally at. I'm excited about the mayor's announcement. We were really part of pushing that forward, and we have an opportunity to push forward further than we have before, because we have resources in a way that we haven't in prior years. And so, we are looking to do the pilot, but also looking to do a study to really think about strategic ways to reduce class size over time. This is work that you've done a long time, I know. And it is not a overnight solve, but it really requires intentional work to do the adjustments programmatically, budgetarily, so that our schools can have the resources to also serve students in smaller class sizes. So there is definitely a commitment here to continue that conversation. It starts with the pilot, but it doesn't end there.
Thank you so much, Chancellor. And now we'll have Monique Farrington present the case for children who actually thrived during remote learning.
Hi, everybody. I just want to share that students have mentally thrived by having the remote option of schooling. Oh, I'm sorry, if you can't see me. Hi. Okay, students have mentally thrived by having the remote option of schooling, especially in the cases of young adults with autism spectrum disorders, whose services will dramatically change in the world more so. And they were struggling to access services during the beginning of the pandemic, as were their caregivers, such as my son. We were receiving 6.13% of services, but then we didn't have to get up early for the bus, to social distance with a wheelchair, which was impossible. And we did telehealth for doctor's appointments, and for PT, and for OT, and for classes. We did light sensory, and he was not isolated or worried and secured. He did speech with me, and he got stronger with me. Other pre-K to third grade parents that I talked to in the Soundview area, when I held meetings, it was 50% mentally better for their children when they were in their homes. The children worked remotely, and they were not bullied. They did not have to get up early for the bus or be late waiting for them. They were not distracted. They were more relaxed. They had no anxiety. They had no limit on their work. There was more focus. They had more family help. They helped out with family members. They were more useful. They were not worried about who was picking them up. They were more responsible. Their behavior was better. The pre-K and kindergartners were more advanced in their work. They were more computer literate. They were more focused. And they were more mentally prepared. And they were not worried about more COVID issues. So the remote helped their families. And those are the reasons why we need to keep the remote, and especially in our Soundview area. Thank you.
Monique, I'm sorry, did you want to say something extra?
No, I just want the remote families, especially in our area. We really need to keep that and have that option for our families. A lot of families in our area, for our people, have a lot of situations that are going on, and they're not ready. And these 2 months, they have to do a lot of transitioning. They did a lot of transitioning within these months to do remote, and they need more time. They need 6 more months.
Thank you so much for that, Monique, and we'll give the Chancellor a minute also to respond.
So, again, like I said over and over again, we are not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Again, we want to look at how do we leverage this tool, these learnings, to really reinvent our system going forward. And I appreciate, I live in the Bronx. And so I know what Bronx families experience. I lived on all sides of the Bronx. I lived in Kingsbridge. I lived in Highbridge. And so I've lived in almost every part of the Bronx that, where families are struggling and grappling with different, not only social emotional issues, but, healthcare concerns and financial issues. And so, we're really thinking forward and looking forward to ensuring that we are wrapping ourselves 100% around our students. And I know we are coming up on time, but I did want to acknowledge where Dr. Stevens started us off. And we've always had an option for our medically fragile students, and we will continue to have an option. And to the points that were raised here today, remote learning is a tool that we can use forward to, homeschooling wasn't the greatest option for many medically fragile families as well. And so we've gained some resources and learned a lot through remote schooling. So I'd love to let Dr. Chen talk a little bit about that and talk a little bit also about our supports for our special ed students and some of our instructional priorities going forward. And so if you give me some time, I'll give you a little more of my time. How about that, Farah? I'm from the Bronx. I got to negotiate.
Listen, we got to hustle. If you're giving us time, we're giving you more time. Right.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to jump in and make this fast.
All right.
Back to what Dr. Stevens was saying, there's already a system set up in the DOE where students who have very specific medical conditions can apply for a process of home and hospital instruction. So any parent can reach out to the guidance counselor at the school to help with that application. We at the DOE work with DOHMH to process that, and those will be approved through that process. And we do also look at the students' transcripts and academic needs and arrange for those services. So that has always been in place, and that will continue to be in place. And Amy, thanks for also mentioning the needs of our students with disabilities, and especially in District 75, where we prioritize. I think folks remember we opened with District 75 first. We knew, as you said, Amy, the needs that students have for in-person, and we were able to do that and prioritize even summer related services in person. So, and we've also, as Kevin talked about, been able to work with students with mask tolerance. So we really continue to be confident that we are not only are schools safe places, but needed places, especially for our students with disabilities.
Thank you so much. And I promise you, if we get through this, we can finish the presentation in a timely fashion, even though we're like at 7 o'clock. So thank you so much for that, Ms. Chen. And now moving on, we have a small video for you from one of our students. Carla, please roll the video.
Hello, Chancellor Meisha Porter. My name is
Can we make that louder, please, caller?
In the next school year. I am an IMP student with medical accommodations because of my diagnosis. I was diagnosed with alveolar rhabdomyosarcoma, a form of pediatric cancer that takes over the muscle. Because of this, I'm now considered an immunocompromised cancer child. Remote learning was a success for me. I become more independent, more reliable, less stressed and anxious, and I got more sleep. I didn't have to worry about kids not wearing their masks. I don't have to worry about going to the bathroom. I don't have to worry about wearing a mask every single day. I have experienced a lot of trauma in the past year since diagnosis, and even more so now because of the pandemic. I'm scared to go into the school. My siblings can't attend because of me and the risk they can bring into our house. I don't want to do home instruction again. This was only 5 hours a week. With remote learning, I did twice or more of that, and it helped me a lot. Please consider to bring remote learning back into our schools. I'm just one student speaking to you now, but a lot of families in the Bronx are experiencing all of this and more. Give us the choice to let us learn on our own. I succeeded and others can too. Trust me, my siblings did too. Our parents are already overwhelmed with everything that is going on. Don't add this to their plate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was Zoe Nieves. Thank you so much for that beautiful video. And this is one child, for example, that the family is really afraid of home learning, of homeschooling, because of the threat of somebody coming in the house and bringing something. And Chancellor, I will give you about a minute to respond.
I'm going to give a minute to Dr. Stevens and thank you all for bringing the voices of young people, which is so important as we make these decisions.
Yeah, I just wanted to just acknowledge how moving that was to hear from Zoe. What an amazing young woman and family. The points you raised are very valid, right? She didn't have to divulge her conditions, but she is an example of someone who would absolutely be encouraged and available to apply for an accommodation, and we would take that through the process that Dr. Chen just described. We are really trying to meet the needs of all of our children, and I know we want as many kids like Zoe to get their needs met as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stevens. And now we are moving on to the topic of parent voice and parent choice. And Griselle Cardona will open that section for us. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So we've heard the many folks speak about the many things as to why we should keep a remote option. But for a second, I want us all to take off our titles and the advocacy hats, and let's think about, as parents, what this means. As a single mother who lives in the Bronx, we know that the pandemic has scared us. I myself had COVID along with my 3-year-old. Thankfully and luckily, with the grace of God, we both made it out okay. But unfortunately, we've lost students, we lost families, we lost caregivers to COVID. And so, I don't want us to forget that that we have lost those. And so putting back on our hat of titles, we all know that in other areas of the Bronx, there have been better resources than others. And looking at, little boy, looking at the 3 feet and 6 feet rule and the guidance, how would this work for schools that are overcrowded? Putting children in other community centers, as it was stated during our last town hall, you're taking away students and you're putting them in another place away from their peers. Once upon a time, parents were able to choose a 3K program that they so wished to put their child in. We once had a choice, but the choice has been taken away. What will happen when the Department of Education sees a rise in number of absenteeism? At this point, parents will fight back. What will we do when we lose enrollment of our kids when they go off to charter schools or private schools because they will provide or may provide that remote option? Are we going to merge more schools, close them down? Our elementary school students who cannot vaccinate, wouldn't that also cause some kind of scare as well? Especially when we've been hearing about with the Pfizer vaccine, with the issue with heart in males, parents are not comfortable and they may not want to vaccinate their children. Are we still willing to put our children at risk? And so, again, as a parent, and taking off the advocacy hats and just really thinking about, are we really thinking this through correctly? Are we really and so our voices are not being heard when the mayor had decided to fully reopen schools. Our voices were not a part of that. Our choice has been taken away. And so therefore, whatever happened to parent choice and parent voice? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Giselle, and I will give the Chancellor about a minute to respond. Thank you.
So, you know, I sit here as a parent making the same decisions with a student who has to travel from the Bronx on a bus and 2 trains to get to school.
Can you put this back? I can't see the Zoom.
Oh, sorry. And so I am always centered there. I always start there. And that is just my reality. And I would say this, I know a lot of these feelings are also coming from an announcement that was made that didn't include a conversation and engagement. Let this be the start of a continued conversation and ongoing engagement. You know, I believe in parent empowerment. I believe in parent voice. It doesn't mean we always agree or always come to the same decision, but at least we engage in a conversation where we are thinking things through together. And we are committed to, you know, leveraging what we've learned, utilizing different tools. We're continuing to work with our healthcare providers, our partners at DOH and ABH to make decisions. We shifted because our families needed us to. I think we are ready to come back, but I also think we have to center many of the concerns that are important, that were raised this evening, that we've heard. And I know that while this is a Bronx conversation, I know that these conversations and these topics are representative of some of the concerns across the city. And so let this be the beginning of an ongoing dialogue.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Chancellor. We only have like 3 more speakers, Chancellor. Please stay with us. I know we are over your time, but I promise you I will bring you your soda and your M&Ms. And I will come to your house.
We're neighbors. So
that's right. So I will come to your house. I'm not a cook, but I will cook. I will clean, whatever you want. Please stay. It's almost over. And now we will have
Farah, I'm just going to quickly jump in because I am her deputy chancellor. And what I can promise you, and I know she's going to hold me accountable to this, but she has to go. But what I can promise is that I will take notes and I will report back to her everything that is said here in this call. But I want to be respectful of our chancellor's time. She is the chancellor of New York City schools.
I'm sorry.
Yes. You don't want my M&Ms?
I do want your M&Ms, Farah, but Adrian is right. And the team is here. And we, like I said, let this be the beginning of a conversation and a dialogue.
Okay, before you go, Chancellor, I do want you to speak to Gary Axelbank for 1 minute on a different topic, but Gary just wanted to bring something to your attention. Okay. And that will only take 2 minutes. Gary, you have exactly 2 minutes because if I were on your show, you would cut me off.
You know, I can do 2 minutes because I do TV and we have a limited amount of time. Chancellor, thank you for taking the time. I want to just talk about experiential learning. I know that this is something that you and many people are behind. When I brought this issue up to the parents group while they were working on my TV show, they all were shocked, really. We have a garden at DeWitt Clinton High School that is really very, very effective. There's a farmers market connected to it. There are a number of groups that are working with it. The community is standing behind it. It provides the school and the students with an opportunity to really learn how to garden, and then the students learn about food insecurity, and then of course can talk about careers. I mean, these are all things after the pandemic that we have to do. For reasons that a lot of people don't quite understand, and I don't either, and I happen to be a DeWitt-Clinton alum, the principal has evicted the garden from DeWitt-Clinton grounds. And I know that Council Member Dinowitz has been in meetings. You know, what can I say? Somehow this has to be a negotiated settlement. This is too precious to lose. And that's number one. And number two, of course, experiential learning is just so important. I'd hate to have this be the precedent that we have something real good, that we lose it, and then all of a sudden all the other schools and parents that want to do something like that get discouraged. Seems to me this is what we ought to encourage, negotiate a settlement here, and then move forward and do something better, not only here at DeWitt-Clinton High School, but at all the schools throughout my home borough of the Bronx. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know about the DeWitt-Clinton Garden. We, we believe in experiential learning. It's important. It also is critical as we bring students back to school that is a part of their learning experience. Dr. Tabaya, who's the executive superintendent for the Bronx, was actually there this morning with the council member, and would be happy to connect with you about what we need to do. So just I'm making that connection, sending Bronx strong love to all of you. Looking forward to continuing to be in dialogue, and let us do this together. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chancellor.
Meisha, I'm gonna fry some chicken and come over with Farrah.
All right.
You want to talk?
Now you're talking.
I used to work at Sylvia's. If I got a fried chicken,
Thank you so much. And now the next presenter is Aixa Rodriguez. It's the Bronx. We got to add that flavor.
Yeah, I'm coming over too, man. Can I share my screen? Is it able to share my screen?
Please do. Yes, please do.
Okay, because I wanted to stay on time. If I don't have the screen show, just to keep it simple. So I'm a teacher. So I'm here inside. Can you guys see my screen? Can you guys see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay, that's weird.
We made you co-host, so check the share button.
Okay, let me see if that lets me right now. Okay, let's try it again. It's like what it was like teaching. Can you see me? Can you see me now? All right, you guys can see it? Okay, so I'm a teacher, so I'm just here in solidarity with the parents who want a remote option. And to make it quick and simple, I would love to propose a comprehensive needs assessment survey for these purposes, to assess the demand. This obviously is a demand, but we need to have a real temperature check to find out the experience of remote learning widely and collect that data, to assess the needs for social emotional support, because you need to plan things. So you need data to plan things, to place people where is needed. And to assess some unmet needs and struggles of families, because those needs will impact the schools, the receiving schools. And as teachers, we feel that this data is good for planning in terms of PDs and other things like that, but also to have an option to create remote learning hubs for groups of teachers who can possibly serve kids by grade bands, depending on the demands at the district, at the borough or city level, depending on how the kids are grouped, so that they can have a mini school community, right? And I think it should inform the planning by superintendents, principals, and support providers for group therapies and different things like that. And it will help us teachers to prepare for what we're going to see when we come in September. We need to be informed. We need this information. But another thing that we were hoping to find out is what flexibility the DOE is looking for in terms of staffing. What else can we do and how can we best be utilized? Someone like me or some of my other friends who are just close to be multiply certified and maybe need a supplemental district superintendent approval. I can get it in multiple subjects. I just need that district superintendent, and then I could be flexible and I could be placed in different places depending on the needs for staffing, et cetera, et cetera. So
we're hoping that the DOE will be innovative and flexible, compassionate and empathetic, but get the data so that we can actually talk about this with solution oriented language, so that we're not just, demanding, but we're trying to be innovative and finding ways to make it happen. Because home instruction is not an option for many people, and it was a subpar option, only 5 hours. That's not okay. And there is probably a very good way to have the teachers matched who have immunosuppressor situations, match them with teaching remotely. And there has to be a way to make things work in hubs so the teachers have their crew to work with for the kids, and the kids have a sense of community. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Aixa. And I don't know, DC Austin, if you want to respond in place of the Chancellor, or do you want us to just keep going with our program and you can bring the notes back to her? Up to you.
I'm taking notes. I don't know if Executive Superintendent Tobias wants to respond, but I think we're taking notes, we're listening, and we will get back to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So next on the agenda is Angela Torres. And Angela will be speaking on, oh my God, Angela, I lost my notes, but I know you're speaking on something wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. My presentation is on the need for parents to have a say on how their children are treated, protected, and instructed. So thank you so much, and we're so glad that you're here. I want to elevate the fact that parents need to be part of the conversation. We were not made part of this conversation in many times throughout this process. And unfortunately, with this decision, which is for all decision, even though, it was mentioned before, the importance of having a not one size fits all approach. By having everyone return, there is a one size fits all approach that is being utilized. Nothing is normal about this year. Let's talk about this. You have children which was very brave, Zoe, who expressed that it's not just her, who would be able to receive the medical accommodation, but it's also her brothers and sisters also are not able to come. Why? Because it leaves her exposed. And so we need to make sure that the parents who are kids, they are our greatest treasures. And we know the insides of what's going on with our kids physically and mentally. We need to be at the table because we need to make sure that they are safe, and that we are knowing the intricacies of what they need. We are making the decisions on how they're treated, protected, and instructed. Our families, what are they dealing with? We have kids that are dealing with anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts. I know of a young lady who recently did commit suicide. Unfortunately, you have health issues. You have your immunocompromised kids and their family members. So you may have other siblings that also cannot come in. We have at-risk students. You have kids that can be carriers that are under the age where they cannot be vaccinated. They don't even have the option of being vaccinated. And so you have them where this could potentially bring it home. And you know what? Here in the Bronx, we saw firsthand what it was to be directly impacted. I myself lost my mother to COVID. I know what it is to lose someone. And there are many who have. And so because of all of these things, who has to be at the table? It must be parents. And so we have a lot of great resources, but if we're not at the table, we're not able to share with you what are the different ideas that we have. What are the different options? One of the things that was said was, remote learning didn't work for some, right? Because there wasn't time to plan. Well, you know what? Now we do have time to plan. Let's plan. Let's say that 20% of them, just as an example, let's say that 20% of the slots are going to be left open for families that are in a situation where they are not comfortable for whatever reason. And let's elevate, going back to something that said before, not just the physical part, right? But what if kids mentally are not ready? Do we want to drive them to a point of possibly having other deeper issues, suicidal thoughts, I don't know, other things that could potentially come? Or do we want to really think about the approach that we take and not have a one size fits all approach and do this over time? We have many ideas. You have incredible leaders here who have different ideas as to how this can go through. But I want to tell you, it's all from the heart. It's because these kids mean everything to us. They mean everything to us. And so we need to be at the table, and we want to have concrete, not just we will be at the table, but we need concrete plan as to how we're going to be included, and not to learn about it on the news. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Torres. Powerful points, Angela. And now, since I'm not sure, DC Austin, do you want to respond, or should I just go through the next person?
I think you can go through and then we'll respond at the end.
Okay, great, thank you. And so the next speaker is now Ida, I'm sorry, Zainos, I'm sorry. But Ida will be speaking on the need to listen to immigrant parents and non-English speakers.
Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Muchos de ustedes me conocen. Mi nombre es Aide Zainos y realmente es frustrante hablar de nosotros los padres que hablamos solamente español, y en este mismo tópico incluyo a los que no hablan inglés y hablan otro idioma, porque todos somos padres de hijos que aprenden el lenguaje inglés. Entonces, como siempre, nuestro problema ha sido en que no se escuchan nuestras voces. Siempre el Departamento de Educación se ha manejado en que los padres es la prioridad, es la base de la escucha de ellos en sus opiniones. Y por lo que estamos viendo, esto no es así. En las elecciones pasadas se hizo un cambio significativo donde los padres pudieron hacer su propia elección. Eso fue grandioso para mí escucharlo, pero al momento en esta decisión volvemos un paso hacia atrás, porque entonces las decisiones se han tomado sin escuchar la voz de los padres, sin preguntarles cómo se sienten, cuál sería la mejor opción para el estudio de sus hijos. Entonces, nuevamente volvemos al espacio de dónde está la equidad con los padres, dónde está la equidad con el lenguaje, el acceso al idioma. Seguimos en la lucha de este término que es muy, muy importante para todos, porque de ahí depende la comunicación, depende el entendimiento, depende de lo que le estamos enseñando a nuestros hijos. Nosotros estamos peleando por ellos, somos la voz de ellos, porque ellos son pequeños. Pero si no me escuchan, ¿cómo voy a hacer que mi hijo entienda esto después? ¿Cómo? Entonces, necesitamos que nos pongan un poco más de atención en que nos deben de preguntar cuál es nuestra opción. Necesitamos más opciones, no solamente una solución. Hay muchas situaciones que se están presentando y las cuales han sido ignoradas. Y precisamente este sería el primer punto, ¿no? Acceso de idioma, que es la interpretación, la traducción de los documentos, la comunicación, y pues seguimos en esto y queremos realmente que nos den una solución con una opción o más de una opción, no solamente que nos digan que hay una opción y está lista, ¿no? Entonces, inclusive contar con muchas familias, necesitamos escucharlas. Realmente no se está aplicando la equidad y no se están cubriendo las necesidades de las familias. Y eso es lo que necesitamos que ustedes sepan. Gracias, Farah.
Thank you so much, Aide, and I do apologize that your topic came last. It's only because of the way it was structured, but next time, you go first. And I'm sorry, Alvin, are you there to translate for us, or did people hear the translation? I'm not sure what happened here. Okay, Alvin, could you please translate for us what she said? Alvin? Okay, Alvin may be having technical difficulties, but regardless of what happens, we will translate that portion to send to the Chancellor and also on Facebook and YouTube. And maybe towards the end, we can get Alvin to translate. In the meantime,
I actually would ask, I'm not sure, but I see I've got a couple of FACE staff who are with us. I'm not sure if anyone would want to.
Yes.
I can definitely give it a shot if Aide helps me, because I may not be able to, I wasn't ready, but I'm going to try to capture everything that she said. All right, so Empezaste con hablar de tus papás, ¿no? Dijiste que eras de Puebla, que así te habían enseñado y que tienes que enseñarle a tus hijos lo que es la participación, algo así, ¿no?
No, nada de eso. Dije que nosotros como padres somos la voz de nuestros hijos y si nosotros no somos escuchados, ¿cómo les vamos a enseñar a nuestros hijos que ellos tienen voz y voto en
Hello.
este país donde es su país?
Kai, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I
Are you
can.
ready?
I
Okay.
yes. I wrote down some of the things that she
Okay.
was. Yeah.
¿Quieres que
So
empiece? Okay.
yeah, I can say. So what she was saying is that it's very frustrated to see that the voice of the parent has been being heard, and she said also that in the previous elections, she saw that there was a lot of input from parents, and the parents' voice was on the table. But she's saying that probably it seems to be like we're coming back to the same situation that we had before about inequity. And she also mentioned that, like, what, as a question, what is the equity, that we have for our parents in our community? And also she said that she needs because all of us are parents from our school, and we have children in school. You also need to for the department of to hear our voice, and also to provide us resources like access to language interpretation and translation. And she said that we need to continue listening to our family and to provide it with more equity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angelica Jackson, even though I know that wasn't Angelica Jackson. And now we have a closing statement. Well, I guess, I don't know, DC Austin, do you want to respond first before our closing statement? Because that is the way it was set up, that you would respond and then we would close out the phone.
Thank you. First, I would just start by saying thank you to all of you. You obviously put a lot of time and dedication into preparing for this event. Everyone who spoke, everyone who asked a question, everyone who did a presentation was very thoughtful. Excellent arguments. A lot of time and effort went into really being strategic about the issues that you guys raised and how you raised them. And many of them were rooted in really personal experiences or experiences that were representative of families across not only the Bronx, but across our city. And so I thank you for that. And I thank you for engaging with us and continuing the conversation, because obviously, we want to move forward. We can't move forward without our families. We can only move forward with the support of our families. We need you all. We need partnership, because what we want is the success of our children. And we really want in the fall for our students and our families to feel confident in the direction that we're going. I have said, and I know, the Chancellor has said open, open, open. I have said, it takes a village to raise a child. And these aren't my words, these are the words of Al Sharpton. So I give credit where credit is due. It takes a village to raise a child. The village is the school. It is the adults, it is the educators and the guidance counselors and the parent coordinators and the principals. It is all those people who are interacting with our children from the beginning of the day till the end of the school day that help us to raise our children. And it is impossible to replicate that online. And it is also the peers that our children are in class with, in school with, that they are side by side with, that socialize them and help them prepare for the world that they're going to grow into adulthood with, that raise our children and raise successful adults. And so I'm very much aligned with the Chancellor, and just want to say, I believe exactly what the Chancellor believes, in that we've got to get our children back to school. That is our version of normal. That is our village. That said, I think there were some really very good points that were raised tonight. I think, we heard from Linda Chen, we heard from Dr. Stevens around medically fragile children and some of the concerns that were raised there. And I think there's certainly both conversation that needs to happen about what we're going to do with our medically fragile children, but also a lot of engagement about how we move forward with our medically fragile children and those families. I want to say I took really good notes. A needs assessment was mentioned. We have actually had conversations with partners like United Way. Actually, I sat down with Sheena Wright from United Way and her team earlier today to talk about a needs assessment for families, because we absolutely need to know where our families are in this moment. A lot of our families have suffered loss and are dealing with grief. A lot of our families have lost employment or are suffering from food insecurity. Our schools need to know that as we prepare for the fall, so that they can be equipped to really address the whole child and the needs of the children when they come back. And so those are conversations that we're having now, and agree with you that that's a priority. I heard Ms. Torres, thank you for sharing your loss. I'm sorry for your loss. Certainly that is an experience that was shared by a lot of folks across the Bronx. I lost my maternal grandmother. My husband lost his maternal grandmother. If you are a person of color in this country, it's very difficult to have escaped the loss that was experienced in this pandemic, the loss of life. And so I am sorry for your loss. We know that that is part of what we need to be preparing for and supporting, not only supporting our staff around, supporting our children around, supporting our families around as we go into the fall. And I hear you and share with you your great desire to make sure that parents are more a part of our planning process and our policy making process as we make plans leading up to fall reopening. I also heard Aida very clearly about the frustration of parent voice not being amplified to the extent that it should be. And I also hear your concern about language access and the need for us to improve on language access. I will say we have a working group. It is a group of advocates that are language justice advocates. We are working to develop a policy, a new policy and a new approach to language access for the fall. We haven't announced anything yet. We're literally still around the table with advocates, but it is a plan. We plan on investing in language access for the fall. I want to, before I go in, because I've got the benefit, and we all have the benefit of having Executive Superintendent of the Bronx, Erica Debaya, here. I know she believes in parent empowerment. I know she's going to have opportunities, and she's already thinking about how she's plugging in parents. I would really like to hear, and for all of us to hear from Executive Superintendent Tobaya as well.
Thank you. Yeah, so most of these parents know me already very well. We do have our monthly parent meeting. I know they like to hear directly from the Chancellor, which I understand, but I'm in constant communication with her, and we are talking about your concerns. You know, I am here, and we're going to continue to communicate and have our meetings and talk. I was at the garden today, just as a point of information, because I know that has come up at multiple meetings that I've been at. I know this isn't really about the garden, but I did want to say, like, when there is a concern, I do respond. So this morning I went to the garden with a team of people to address the community concerns. Councilman Dinowitz was there. We had a discussion, and we are going to have a positive outcome for the community with the community voice regarding the garden. So I just did want to talk about working with the garden and understanding the different community voices there. So that is something that did take place today. Also was in schools today, following up on a lot of different things. So, you know, parents, I am here to listen and to have more conversation. I hear the frustration. I'm reading the chat. There's a lot of frustration, a lot of people feeling not heard. And I understand that. And we are here to listen, and we will continue to have these forums. I want to thank all the parents who organized this, and just, you know, if we need to have more of these, I'm certainly available to, you know, to do more of these with you, and be happy to continue the dialogue. And we do hear you, hear your frustration, and we're going to address it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tobaya, and DC Austin, Deputy Chancellor. For those of you who don't know what DC stands for, because it sounds like Washington, DC. And now we'll have our closing statement from our co-founder, Tom Shepard. So Tom, please take it away.
Thank you. So I wanted to just first start by thanking Chancellor Porter, Deputy Chancellor Austin, and all the representatives from the Department of Education for agreeing to meet with us. I believe it was October 2019 when she and I attended a CPAC meeting at Tweed. Mr. Mojica, I believe you were there too. There were parents from all over the city engaging with then Chancellor Carranza about issues important to their districts. As we stood in the back of the room looking around the table, I was both impressed and disturbed at the same time. While I was impressed at the number of people in attendance, I was also concerned that most of the seats designated for Bronx parents were empty. I leaned over to her and asked the question, "Where are all the people from the Bronx?" I believe we both understood the gravity of the question I was asking. After all, our voices as Bronx parent leaders have long been unheard because we are either not at the table or drowned out by those whose issues didn't align with us. This has to change, I said, with an internal resolve to see that it never happens again. I spent some time thinking about what this has to change looks like. And then we were hit with this pandemic. It became clear to everyone that this played out differently for us in the Bronx, played out differently for us as Bronx communities than it did for everyone else. We were contracting and dying from COVID-19 at higher rates than our neighbors in other boroughs. We were the essential workers taking care of everyone else while this pandemic ravaged our homes and communities. Our children didn't have the same access to food and stable shelter as everyone else. We didn't have the same access to technology and the internet as everyone else, which disconnected us from our schools and from each other. We didn't have the related services for our students with disabilities and IEPs. We also didn't have access to adequate learning materials. And we certainly had almost no support for all of these in the languages that our families speak in the Bronx. To quote our former Deputy Chancellor of Community Empowerment and Partnerships, and you, Deputy Chancellor Austin, if you are not at the table, then you're probably on the menu. And for me, it certainly felt that way. This experience motivated me to organize the Bronx Parent Leaders Advocacy Group. As a coalition of parent leaders who represent all 6 CECs, District 75, President's Councils, and active parent and parent-teacher associations across the Bronx, our mission is to be active partners in determining what education looks like for our children during and after this pandemic, to actively engage with the DOE and those who represent us as elected officials. All of that leads us to where we are now. The mayor's announcement that this year's school reopening plan would not include a remote option was problematic for us as Bronx families. Everyone who spoke today shared their particular issues with not having a remote option. I wanted to take a moment and share mine. As a veteran of the United States Navy who suffers from post-traumatic stress, I'm keenly aware of the impacts of that stress on decision-making and the support necessary for me to manage that stress in a way that allows me to be productive. I understand that healing and recovery are deeply personal and cannot happen on arbitrary timelines and cannot happen without comprehensive support. Simply stated, some people can recover and heal from trauma very quickly, while others never do. I believe that any system that serves a population of people dealing with trauma must be flexible enough to work with people where they are instead of where it wants them to be. Applied to our current experience, there are some people who dealing with 15 months of isolation in their own homes may welcome a return to in-person learning. In contrast, others who have suffered through COVID themselves or experienced the loss of family members and friends may be terrified by the prospect from fear of contracting COVID again. While we all experience the former, I respectfully submit that students and families in the Bronx have disproportionately experienced the latter. In addition to the issues that have already been discussed here, it's also important to note that disproportionately poor health outcomes, disproportionately overcrowded schools, and a disproportionate lack of resources to support these historic issues have also contributed to the disproportionate trauma that many Bronxites are dealing with. Specifically, The Bronx being 62 of 62 in the state of New York in health outcomes makes students and families especially vulnerable in a way that should necessitate a remote option for us as a community. I believe the city and the DOE must, in a deliberate way, prioritize, plan, and allocate the resources necessary to deal with historical disproportionality, as well as the trauma inflicted on our Bronx communities as a result of this pandemic before eliminating the remote option for our families. Doing it any other way puts the cart before the horse and starts this healing and recovery process from where we would like to be without respecting where we currently are. So with that, we are respectfully calling on the mayor and the Department of Education to reconsider its current position and reinstate a remote option for our families for the upcoming school year. Again, we would like to thank you for meeting with us this evening and look forward to working with you. Look forward to continuing to work with you in reimagining, redesigning, and rebuilding a public school system that addresses the specific needs of Bronx students, families, schools, and communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I would like to reiterate, Tom, and thank everyone, all our attendees. I believe we had over 160 plus people or 50 plus people, however it was. And this was on short notice, right? Yeah, so that tells you how big the topic is in the Bronx. And I want to thank the Chancellor, the Deputy Chancellor, Dr. Stevens, the whole team from FACE for a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I want to thank our experts who came in, our doctors and our social worker and all the parents who were so brave and did all that work to have this conversation. I couldn't be prouder of the members of Bronx Flag, the Parent Leaders Advocacy Group for the Bronx, yeah. And I couldn't be prouder of the people from the DOE that we work with. And I want you to know, Dr. Tobiah, DC Austin, you guys rock. Love you all, and let's get some work done so that we can actually hear the voices of parents. Leonie, I love you, and let's just do this so that we can include everyone at the table and give everyone a piece of the pie the way they need it and the way they like it. Have a good evening, everyone.
All right. Have a good night.
Yes, and now Bronx Flag will debrief.
All right.
And thank you guys, Face. At Face, you guys are